Hi. So, do you guys want to hear an old Japanese story? Okay, I'll do my best. No promises. So, this is the story of the guy who is arguably the most important person in Japanese history. Now, that is arguable, but this guy's name is Shotoku Taishi, or was, or it's not yet. Because this is ancient Japan, and what you have to understand is nobody can keep their names straight. They always change. Anyway, let's go back somewhere around the late 500s AD. Once upon a time, there was a man named Emperor Yome. Except he wasn't Emperor Yome. I don't know what his name was at the beginning of this story, but he was not quite yet emperor. Anyway, he had a wife. It's cool, a wife, right? I don't know what her name is. The story doesn't mention it. But he had a wife who was the daughter of a guy named Anahobe no Mahito. And she was a nice lady. At least I assume so. It doesn't tell us. But anyway, she was asleep one day, having a dream, and in this dream, a golden monk appeared out of nowhere, showed up right before her. And he tells her, he says, I have a vow to save the world, and I have chosen you to be my mom. And she's startled, okay, because she thought she was a nobody. She says that. She turns to him and says, oh, okay, I don't know who you are, good golden monk, but who are you, and why have you taken an interest in little old me? I'm a nobody. I'm just a sinful, mortal woman. I'm nothing special. I'm just a normal woman. But this gold monk looks at her and says, you know what? I know that you're worldly, and that you're sinful, and that you're imperfect, but I don't care. I have come to save the world. I am a world-saving bodhisattva. And with that, he flew up into the air, and she's sitting there staring at it with her mouth agape like, oh my gosh. And so he flies up into the air, and he flies back down, and goes into her mouth. Doesn't explain how exactly that worked. He flies into her mouth. She feels like she's got something caught in her throat. She's like, ugh. And then she wakes up, and lo and behold, she's now pregnant. Because that's how it happens, kids. That's how it happens. So, fast forward about 9 months, and it's now New Year's Day. Emperor Yome, who again is not Emperor Yome, but his older brother ascends to the throne and becomes Emperor Bidatsu. So in the first new year of the year that Emperor Bidatsu takes the throne, this lady is walking by the horse stables, very pregnant, when, oh, wouldn't you know, time to give birth, out pops a prince. Brand new, fancy prince. I guess there was no labor. I guess the ancient Japanese just assumed that he popped out, or maybe he just popped out because he was a special snowflake. I'm not sure. I don't know. But he just pops out next to the horse stables. This lady's servants scoop him up, they wrap him in some swaddling clothes, and they take him somewhere that's a little bit more appropriate for the birthing of a prince. Somewhere inside, you know. But anyway, they take him there, and as soon as they bring him inside, he starts emitting this reddish gold light. Fills the whole room. And everyone's like, whoa, what's even going on here? And then, not only that, but the whole room gets filled with this sweet fragrance, like incense, just everywhere. And so, by this, everybody starts realizing, okay, don't know who this kid is, but he's clearly something special. And he was special, because apparently he started forming words after only 4 months old. And not only that, but about a year later, he's hanging out one day, as a 1-year-old. He suddenly turns to face the east, he slaps his hands together, and he says, Namu Butsu, which basically means hail to the Buddhas. So not only is he speaking way earlier than kids are normally supposed to be able to speak, but he's also praying to Buddhists, to Buddhas. He's praying to Buddhas. So this kid is some sort of Buddhist sage, I guess you could call it. The young prince is now 6 years old. And from one of the Korean kingdoms, because at the time, in this time period, Korea was split up into 3 or 4 kingdoms depending on the time period. One of those kingdoms that Japan actually had really close relationship with was a kingdom called Paekche. So there's a monk who came from Paekche to Japan, and he brought with him a bunch of Buddhist sutras. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. You hear the word sutra, and instantly your mind goes to the Kama Sutra, okay? Because I know what the internet is like, and I know what goes through your heads. But sutra does not mean the Kama Sutra, okay? It just means Buddhist scripture. So please get your head out of the gutter, you degenerate internet weirdos. Guess it's not that weird, but whatever. Anyway, he brings some sutras over, and he declares that he's going to have a debate and a discussion on these sutras. He's going to have a whole shindig at this thing. Now, you also have to remember, though, that at the time, Buddhism was not largely known in Japan. It was still relatively new. People hadn't really heard about it. The emperor certainly wasn't a part of anything to do with it. There maybe were a handful of nobles here and there, largely people who were actually immigrants from the Korean peninsula, but mostly the vast, vast, vast majority of people at the time in Japan were not interested in Buddhism at all. Or maybe they were, but if they were, it was mostly because that they wanted to get access to some of this Chinese high culture that they needed to go through Buddhism to get. Anyway, so when the young prince hears that there's this Pekche from monk, when the young prince learns that there's this monk from Pekche who is expounding the sutras, he goes to the emperor and he asks the emperor, "Hey, Mr. Emperor, sir, I would like to go listen to this guy talk about the sutras. Can I do so?" And the emperor was really confused, because why is a 6-year-old kid coming and asking if he can go listen to some foreign religion that nobody really even knows about or cares about? He should be off, like, I don't know, playing Pokemon or, rolling in the dirt or eating bugs, whatever 6-year-old kids normally do. But here he is, asking to join a lecture on a foreign religion. So the emperor was a little bit confused. So he turns to the prince and he asks him, "Why? Why do you want to go see this? Shouldn't you be rolling in the dirt and eating bugs?" But the prince turns to him and says, "A long, long time ago, I used to live in China. I lived in a little place called Nayue, and while I lived there, I was actually a devout Buddhist, and I practiced the Buddhist path for many, many years. But I have been reborn into this country this time, and so I want to continue my training and go listen to these sutras." The emperor heard this and thought, "Yeah, okay, seems legit." So sent the kid off. "Shoo, go listen to your sutras, that's fine." Which he did. The kid shows up, helps light incense for this monk and for the expounding of these sutras, and then when he comes back to the emperor, he has something to say. He comes back to the emperor, he says, "Mr. Emperor, sir, I may only be 6 years old, but I learned from this sutra expounding, I learned from these sutras that the 8th, 14th, 15th, 23rd, 29th, 30th days of the month are called the 6 days of purification. Therefore, Mr. Emperor, sir, I do believe that we should ban the taking of all life on these 6 days. Because it's not just us. Everywhere in the world that has Buddhism also does this too. So I think it's a good idea." And the emperor, maybe because a 6-year-old kid was actually listening to Buddhist sutras, and, when he was born he was like shining and stuff, he thinks this is a good idea, and he promptly sends out a decree that on these 6 days nobody's allowed to kill anything. Yay for Buddhism. 2 years later, the young prince is 8 years old, and this time, a monk from a different Korean kingdom, Shila, comes bringing a statue of a Buddha. And as they're taking it wherever they're going to take it, the young prince sees this and goes, "Ah, this is most certainly the statue of Shaka Nyodai, who lives in the West." Now, another thing you have to know about ancient Japanese culture is the significance of the West, okay? Since Japan is about as far east as you could go, the West could mean a whole bunch of different things. Number one, it could mean Korea, which, as you can see from this story, was a conduit for a lot of Chinese high culture coming into Japan. It could also mean China itself, which was the origin for a lot of this high culture, which the Japanese were all the rage about during this time. It could also mean India, which was the origin of Buddhism. And last, but probably most importantly, it could mean the Pure Land of Amida. Now, Amida is the Japaneseified version of the Sanskrit name Amitabha, who was supposedly another Buddha, because the historical Buddha is not the only Buddha, but another Buddha who lived super far to the west and lived in what was called his Pure Land. It was a land that was like a paradise all around where he lived. And good Pure Land Buddhists, by chanting and calling on Amida's name, believed that they could be reborn in Amida's Pure Land. And when they did that, the next time they died, they were basically guaranteed to achieve nirvana, which is the goal of all Buddhists, mostly. So again, 8-year-old kid sees a statue of Buddha. Buddhism is not known in Japan, and yet he goes, this is Shaka Nyodai, who dwells in the West. And everybody's like, kind of confused, but that's who we're dealing with. And then, yet another monk from Korea shows up, this time from Paekche. Again, like I said, Paikche in Japan had a lot of this going on. Oh my gosh, please don't get any ideas. Anyway, so this monk's name was Nichija, and one day he was chilling in the city of Naniwa, which is close to present-day Osaka, if you guys know where that is or you want to look at a map. But he's just kind of hanging out, doing whatever Korean Buddhist monks do, chilling, when he spies the young prince. Now at the time, the prince was actually running around with some other kids who were below his station, shall we say. And the prince was actually dressed to accommodate, because now I guess he did want to roll around in the dirt and eat some bugs, because he was wearing some rather tattered clothes and running around with street urchins, essentially. And yet, despite his shabby appearance, Nichira could tell instantly that this kid was something special. Something was different about this kid. And so he's just staring at him going, holy crap, who is this kid? Where did he come from? Why is he so amazing looking? And the young prince, Shotoku, we'll call him Shotoku from now on, Shotoku sees this old Korean monk just staring at him, and he's like, okay. And so, without saying much, he turns around and he starts running. And this seems to snap Nichija out of whatever daze he was in by how beautiful and how amazing this kid looked. And as soon as this kid starts running, he throws himself to his knees, he clasps his hands together, and says in classical Chinese, which was essentially the scholar's tongue that all the smart people spoke in ancient East Asia, "Glory and thanks be to Kanon, the savior of the world. His teachings passed to and enlightened the East and have scattered abroad to the kings of even the smallest countries. You'll have to bear with me because that was written in classical Chinese. I don't speak classical Chinese. I know Japanese and some classical Japanese, but I did my best, and it's probably wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's something like that." Anyway, the prince hears this, and he stops and he turns around. And wouldn't you know, this Paikche, this monk from Paikche is now glowing with this golden light. And the prince, he turns around and he starts shooting a beam of light from in between his eyebrows. It's like a holy Kamehameha, but out of his head. And that's important because that's something that Buddhas are supposed to be able to do. In the Lotus Sutra, there's a Buddha that actually does that. And he shines a light and it shows like the whole world and stuff. I don't know. It's ancient Indian, really complicated stuff. But you know, it's this is where your third eye is, right? This is where your what's that part of your brain called? The part that like helps you make decisions or something? I don't know. Your frontal cortex? This is where stuff happens, okay? This is an important part of your brain. But he's shooting light from between his eyebrows, and this monk is glowing, so they're just glowing and shining and ooh, holy Buddhist magic. Cool. Okay, and yet again, we have another gift of Buddhism from, you guessed it, Paikche. This time it was a statue of the Buddha Maitreya, who was yet another Buddha. So, in our world, the last Buddha to be here was Shakyamuni, who is a historical Buddha. It's the guy you usually think of when people say the Buddha. But there's a prediction that at some point, the Buddha Maitreya is going to come to the world and spread Buddhism once again. That's about all I can say with certainty. But anyway, the statue of Maitreya comes to Japan, and there's a guy here in Japan, one of those few nobles who's actually like really into Buddhism. His name is Soga no Umako. I'll call him Lord Soga no Umako or Lord Soga, Lord Umako. Soga no Umako. Maybe I'll just say Soga no Umako. Anyway, this Soga no Umako, he's really big in this whole Buddhist thing. There's some historical suspicions that maybe the Soga clan, his family, was actually immigrants from Korea and they had only been in Japan for like 1 or 2 generations. It's debated. But anyway, he's way big into this whole Buddhist thing. And when this statue comes, he personally builds a temple next to his house, and he also builds a pagoda. Now, some of you guys may not know what a pagoda is. It's basically when you see in like a Buddhist temple complex, there's usually like this big tower, this like multi-tiered tower with like multiple roofs. And in fact, you can see there's a pagoda right there. Right there. You see it? That's a pagoda. Anyway, so he starts building this pagoda because that's what you need in a good Buddhist temple complex. You need a pagoda. But Prince, who again is still pretty young, comes to this Soga no Umako, and he tells him, he says, "Hey, Mr. Soga, sir, here's the thing about building a pagoda. You are required, it is imperative that when you build a pagoda, you have to have some remains of the bones of the Buddha after he was cremated." Which is a little weird, but okay, rules are rules. But anyway, the prince then produces one speck of Buddha bone dust and puts it in a vase of lapis lazuli. Well, then they house that in the pagoda. And from thenceforth, Soga no Umako and Prince Shotoku are like super good friends because they love Buddhism. They're bros. They're Buddhist bros. Okay? They're big Buddhist bros. Big boo. I'm not going to go any further with that. But anyway, they both work together and they decide that they're going to spread Buddhism all throughout the country. However, things weren't great because not long after that, the whole country was struck with a huge plague. A bunch of people started dying. And there was at this time 2 other men who were not big fans of this whole Buddhist thing, and they had an ancient pedigree in Japan going back a long, long time. The first guy was the head of the Mononobe clan, and his name was Yuge no Moriya. The second guy was the head of the Nakatomi clan, and his name was Katsumi. But they saw this whole epidemic spreading everywhere. And they came to the emperor and they said, Mr. Emperor, sir, here's the thing. In our country, we don't do this whole Buddhist thing. We have from the beginning of time, since the age of the gods themselves, worshipped the gods and the gods only. And yet, this Soga no Umako has brought all this weird Buddhist nonsense in here, and the gods are mad at us. And that's why everybody's getting sick. If you don't get rid of this Buddhist stuff, everyone's gonna die. And the emperor thought this sounded like a good idea. And he's like, you know what? I think you guys might have a point. And therefore, let's get rid of all this Buddhist stuff. You guys go take care of the deed. But just before he sent him off, Prince Shotoku came to the emperor and said, Mr. Emperor, sir, these guys don't know what they're talking about. If the country is ruled by righteousness, good things will happen. If it's ruled by not righteous men, like these guys over here, then bad things are going to happen. And they don't understand karma. There's this little thing called karma. They don't even know what it is. And if you let them do this, it's not going to be great. Let's just say that. But the emperor was probably thinking something to the effect of, hey man, you know what? We tried this Buddhist thing. You guys have been fighting about this, because apparently they'd been fighting about it. But you guys have been fighting about this thing, so we're going to let them give it a try and see what happens. So the emperor dispatched the 2 men, specifically Moriya of the Mononobe clan, sent them off to Soga no Umako's brand new temple. They burned the temple down. They burnt all of the sutras inside. They took the Buddha statue that was in the temple, threw it into the bay, and then they drove out the 3 nuns that were working there, because apparently there were 3 nuns working there for some reason. I don't know why it was nuns, but they were nuns. That very same day, a huge wind came out of nowhere. There's no clouds, no sign of a storm. This huge wind starts blowing. It's freaking everybody out. And then, even though there were no clouds, it also started to rain. And the prince, upon seeing this, was like, I told you, here comes calamity. And then not long after that, everybody started getting sick anew. But this time, not with whatever unnamed sickness before, but they started getting sick with boils. These massive, massive, terrible blisters. Just these boils all over. And apparently, they hurt. It felt like you were on fire. They were so painful. And guess who caught these 2 blisters? The Nakatomi guy and the Mononobe guy. And so they're covered in blisters, and they come to the emperor, and they're in such pain. And they pleaded with the emperor. They said, Mr. Emperor, sir, please, this is way too much. This is so painful. We didn't understand. We were wrong. Let's do this whole Buddhist thing. Apparently it's good. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. Please just let us do this. And the emperor said, okay. And so the 2 men went back to Soga no Umako's house. They rebuilt the temple. They rebuilt the pagoda. I don't know how they got the statue back into it, but apparently they did. They brought back the 3 nuns. And the worship of Buddhism continued as before. What do you know? And then, not long after that, Prince Shotoku's dad, Emperor Yome, who wasn't Emperor Yome, ascended the throne and finally became Emperor Yome. And the thing about Emperor Yome is he was actually really, really into this whole Buddhist thing. He thought it was pretty cool. His son was super into it, and apparently he inherited some of that zeal from his dad, or maybe it was the other way around. Not sure. But anyway, the emperor decided that it would be a good idea to bring some Buddhist monks into the palace for the first time. You know, where all the really powerful, smart people hobnobbed with each other and whatnot. And so he sent Soga no Umako. He said, hey, go find me some Buddhist priests and bring them over here so we can, hang out. Which Soga no Umako was very happy to do so. And so, while there are these Buddhist monks going around, presumably teaching the powerful people in Japan in the imperial palace, Prince Shotoku was so happy, so utterly joyful, that he found Soga no Umako, and he clasped him by the hand, and he's just weeping with tears of joy. He was so happy. And he told Soga no Umako, he said, bro, you're my Buddha bro. You're my Buddha bro. Nobody else understands how important this is except for you. You're the only guy I can talk to about this. I'm so happy this is happening. We are doing such good. Needless to say, he was happy. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, because for whatever reason, despite apparently the two anti-Buddhist guys were supposedly cool with reinstating Buddhism, they weren't actually cool with it. Or maybe they were. I'll let you decide. But anyway, the story says that apparently there were some rumors floating around. Some people got it into the head of the Mononobe clan, got it into the head of the Mononobe clan, the head of Lord Moria. Some people started telling him, hey, Prince Shotoku and Soga no Umako are plotting to get you. You should do something about that. So Lord Moria, being the head of the Mononobe clan, which was a warrior clan, by the way. Mononobe kind of literally means something to the effect of clan of weaponry, something. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, he starts gathering a bunch of men. Make arms. 2 arms. Let's make an army. Arms. So he gets a bunch of guys together, and they hole up in a defensive position. The head of the Nakatomi clan, who is also one of these anti-Buddhist guys, friends with Lord Moria, was like, hey, we should go help him out. So he brings a bunch of dudes, and they all hole up in this one stronghold. And then more rumors start spreading. Rumors apparently that these 2 men were trying to use black magic to curse the emperor. At least that was the rumor and the pretext for Soga no Umako and Prince Shotoku to gather their own forces and go beat the crap out of these 2 anti-Buddhist guys. So we've got the 2 sides, the rebel anti-Buddhists and the imperial Buddhists. So it's a Star Wars reference. Think the Star Wars, but the good guys are the imperialists and the bad guys are the rebels. Because this is ancient Japan, they don't exactly share our same view of the world. Anyway, so the imperial forces come in, and they start moving on these rebel forces that are holed up in a defensive position. And their defensive position is actually so good that they drive back the imperial forces not once, not twice, but thrice. And so everybody in the imperial side is kind of getting disheartened. So the prince, at this time, he's only 16 years old, so he's still pretty young. But he quickly finds one of the heads of his army, of the imperial forces, and he tells this guy, hey look, okay, you need to cut down a tree, and you need to carve a statue of the Shitenno, which is the 4 heavenly kings, which are Buddhist guardian deities. I don't know if they're Buddhas themselves or bodhisattvas or what they are exactly, but they're like mythical protectors of Buddhism. And they're usually pretty fierce and kick butt. Anyway, he tells this guy, you need to go carve a statue of this, and what we'll do is we'll hoist it up on our spears, we'll pray to it, and we'll say, hey, if we get the victory, we will build a temple to the 4 heavenly kings, the Shitenno. And everybody thinks that this is a great idea, and that's what they start doing. They carve a statue, they hold it up, they start praying to it, and they promise that they'll build a temple to it if they win. But as they're doing this, the head of the Mononobe clan, Lord Moria, climbs a tree, says a prayer to the gods of his country, the gods of his clan, and he shoots an arrow at the prince. And this one single arrow comes flying, and it smacks the prince right in the armor, and it just clinks off of his armor, because apparently he had good armor, and the arrow just kind of falls pathetically to the ground. So the prince goes, okay, that's how it's going to be, and he turns to one of his servants, one of his retainers, one of his warriors, and he tells this guy to pray to the 4 heavenly kings and return shot. And the guy does. Prays to the 4 heavenly kings, knocks his arrow, and he lets it fly, and it soars straight, really up high, because I'm assuming Lord Moria was in a tree, and it smacks Moria right in the center of the chest, and he comes careening, crashing down from the tree, lands head first onto the ground, just splat, he's dead. He's done. It's Dunskies. And with that, the Mononobe and the Nakatomi forces broke. They're running around, they're freaking out. They just lost their leader. So they get routed, the Imperial forces move in, clean up house, and they do what samurai had actually been doing for centuries at this point, and they took Moria's head as a trophy. What do you know? And then, of course, it's war. So they loot Moria's house, because that's where they were holed up, in like a castle kind of thing. But they loot the house, and they take all the spoils of war, and they donate it to the brand new temple that they are having built for the 4 heavenly kings atop of a cliff at a place called Tamatsukuri. Honestly, that's going to be it for now. This story continues. This was only like the first half of the prince's life. There's still the second half that we got to get through, and he does some crazy stuff. And there's some of the other accomplishments that aren't actually recorded in the story, but we're going to get to anyway to help explain why I think he's actually the single most important person in Japanese history. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. Appreciate you guys hopping on, taking a gander. This is a brand new project that I'm working on. Hopefully I can keep it going, and I can give you guys some enjoyment in life, and you can enjoy some old-timey, very, very, very old Japanese stories. That's going to do it for me now. Feel free to like and subscribe and all the YouTube jazz that everybody likes to go on. But yeah, I don't know how to end this properly.